Somewhere outside Cairo, about 4,500 years ago, a man woke up before sunrise, ate bread and onions, drank his daily ration of beer, and walked to work. His job that day was moving a 2.5-ton block of limestone across wet sand using nothing but a wooden sled and the strength of the people around him. He wasn't a slave. He was a skilled worker, and he was paid. That one fact breaks the story most of us were handed. Because the version of pyramid construction that has lived in textbooks, movies, and documentaries for over a century looks like this. A god king with unlimited power, hundreds of thousands of slaves dragged from their homes, whipped across desert sand, worked to death building monuments to someone else's ego. And the archaeological evidence doesn't support a single part of it. So where did that story come from? A Greek historian named Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BCE, roughly 2,000 years after the pyramids were built, and wrote that 100,000 slaves constructed them. He was working from rumors and second-hand accounts about events that happened 20 centuries before his visit. We built an entire mythology around a tourist's notes. Then, in 1990, a horse stumbled into a hidden shaft near the pyramids and fell in. What archaeologists pulled out of that shaft didn't match anything Herodotus had written. It didn't match the movie version either. It matched something far more interesting. They found a city. Not a slave camp, not a temporary settlement, a permanent, purpose-built workers' city with bakeries, breweries, a medical facility, and cemeteries. Archaeologist Mark Lenner, who has spent decades excavating this site, estimates that at any given time, around 20,000 to 30,000 workers lived and worked there. Not 100,000 slaves, 20,000 skilled workers with beds, food, and healthcare. The bakeries alone tell a story. Lenner's team found industrial-scale bread production facilities capable of feeding thousands of people per day. The workers were consuming enormous quantities of beef and fish, cuts from the better parts of the animal, not scraps. This is not how you feed a slave workforce. This is how you feed people whose skills you cannot afford to lose. The cemeteries confirmed it. Skeletons found at the site show healed fractures, bones that broke and were set and recovered properly. Someone was treating these people when they got hurt. Several skeletons show evidence of complex surgical procedures, including amputations that the patients survived. A slave economy doesn't invest in the medical recovery of its labor force. These people were being kept alive deliberately because they were valuable. And then there are the graffiti. Scattered across the stones of the pyramids themselves, workers left behind tags for their teams. Names like the Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. These weren't prisoners marking days on a wall. These were crews with identities, with pride, with something resembling a workplace culture 4,500 years ago. Drunkards of Menkaure. Honestly, that's a better team name than most sports franchises have managed in the last 100 years. The people who built the greatest structure in human history named themselves after their beer ration and carved it into the stone. That's not the behavior of people who were dragged there against their will. So if not slaves, then who exactly were these people and why were they there? The evidence suggests a rotating workforce. Farmers from across Egypt who came to work on the pyramids during the flood season, the months when the Nile overflowed its banks and agriculture stopped entirely. They couldn't farm, so they built. In exchange, they received food, beer, medical care, and something that may have mattered even more than any of that: the chance to work on something that would last forever. Egyptians believed the pharaoh controlled the flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the land, and the movement of the sun. Building his monument wasn't forced labor. For many of them, it was an act of devotion, the closest thing their world had to a sacred purpose. But none of that explains the part that still keeps engineers up at night. How? The Great Pyramid contains 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons. The heaviest weigh 80. The entire structure covers 13 acres. When it was completed, it stood 146 meters tall, the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. And it is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. That is not an accident. That is not brute force. That is precision that modern engineers openly admit they struggle to explain. Here is what we actually know about the how. A painting discovered in the tomb of Jehutihotep, an Egyptian official who lived around 1900 BCE, shows something simple and devastating. A massive stone statue being dragged on a wooden sled, while a single worker stands at the front pouring liquid onto the sand ahead of it. For years, nobody paid much attention to that detail. Then, in 2014, physicists at the University of Amsterdam tested it. They built a replica sled, loaded it with weight, and dragged it across dry sand, and then across sand that had been slightly wetted. The wet sand reduced the friction by almost exactly half. One person pouring water in front of a sled could effectively double the pulling power of the entire team behind it. The Egyptians had been using the physics of wet sand to move 2.5-ton blocks at least 600 years before the pyramids were even built. And the blocks didn't travel far on foot. The Nile did most of the work. Limestone quarries sat directly adjacent to the river. Blocks were cut, loaded onto barges, floated downstream to Giza, and unloaded at a harbor that Leaner's team discovered in 2013 sitting less than half a mile from the pyramid base. Not dragged across miles of open desert. Floated to the door, getting them up was a ramp. Not one ramp, probably several, modified as the pyramid grew in height, with teams working multiple faces simultaneously to maintain the pace. The logistics of coordinating 20,000 workers across a structure that changed shape every few months required planning, record-keeping, and management systems sophisticated enough that some historians argue the pyramids didn't just reflect Egyptian civilization. They may have helped create it. The organizational systems built to coordinate that workforce became the administrative blueprint for running an empire. Step back and look at what this actually is. 4,500 years ago, a civilization without steel, without wheels on axles, without engines of any kind, looked at a piece of desert and decided to build something so permanent that it would still be standing when their language was a dead thing and their gods were forgotten. And they did it not with chains, but with an understanding of physics that took the modern world until 2014 to fully appreciate. The man who woke up before sunrise and ate his bread and onions and walked to work that morning wasn't a victim of history. He was one of its makers. He moved a 2.5-ton block across wet sand, set it into place, and added one more piece to something that 45 centuries later still makes engineers question what they think they know. We didn't build the pyramids in spite of our humanity. We built them because of it.